Are there still some people still at the party in the park from last night? That's what I want to know. Did we lose? We're not the U.S. Army Rangers. We leave men and women behind at amusement parks, all right? I'm just going to be completely honest about that. We apologize. It was a little warm in some of the breakout rooms this morning. There was an AC malfunction overnight. A little warm, meaning it was 217 degrees. Just a little. But a lot of us are Southerners. We can take the heat, right? And we're in politics. I know we can all take the heat because we're not getting out of the kitchen or the breakout session. But we're glad that you are taking advantage of those breakout sessions. You survived the boot camp of day one, and now you're down to the afternoon general session. What a day. And we're proud to have this first speaker today. You know, a lot of times in the United States Senate, people decide to take the orders from above, right? Have you seen that? How many times have we seen that? You know, both, and by the way, they say there's no bipartisanship in Washington. Well, there is here. Both parties expect the new guys and new gals that go up there to sit down, shut up, bide their time, learn how to get earmarks, or learn how to get stuff for the folks, and really put their ideology and their beliefs and convictions and all that aside for the sake of listening to the all-powerful, all-knowing leaders, right? Supposed leaders. Are you glad that we've got a couple of United States senators who say, thanks, but no thanks? We're going to do what's right from day one. I'm a South Carolinian and by birth, and absolutely some fellow Carolinian, Tracy and the gang are here. A lot of you are here. But I was always so proud to have Jim DeMint, who from day one stood tall and stood firm in this regard. And Senator DeMint left the Senate and is doing incredible work at the Heritage Foundation now. We're so proud of him, what he's doing, what he's accomplishing for the cause. And, you know, and sometimes God just says, well, we let one guy move here, but maybe we'll move someone else in at a key moment of need. And I think he knew there was a key moment of need, and we all said, well, let's make Ted Cruz Senator Ted Cruz, and we're glad he's there. He came up here. I'll tell you, he's taken time away from his family to be here, and we're so thankful for that. All of us, I know we are thankful for that, and it's a holiday weekend, but he cares about the cause just like and as much as all of you care about the cause. And we're so honored to kick off this general session of the 2013 Defending the American Dream Summit with our friend and a rising leader, mark my words, a rising leader for this nation and for our cause, Senator Ted Cruz. Thank you for coming. It means a lot.
Thank you. Wow. Thank God for AFP. And thank God for each and every one of you here today. Thank you. Thank you. And I love each of you. Now let me start with a word of warning. By virtue of each of you being here today, tomorrow morning you're going to be audited by the IRS. So I appreciate the courage of your convictions. You know, right now, one of the most popular television shows in America is Duck Dynasty. Now, I'm told that President Obama has never watched this show. And apparently an aide recently came into the Oval Office to try to explain it to him. Said, Mr. President, it's all about this Southern God-fearing family of entrepreneurs who love liberty and love to hunt. Obama responded, so is it a fantasy show? And the response was, no, Mr. President, it's more like a horror film. And so the president immediately ordered an IRS audit. You know, there's a disconnect in Washington. Politicians in Washington look to shows like Duck Dynasty, look to men and women in this room, look to Americans, and don't understand where we're coming from. We are facing enormous fiscal and economic challenges, and the unhappy truth is, it has been career politicians in both parties who have gotten us in this mess. But let me give you a word of optimism. There is a grassroots uprising that is sweeping this nation. Y'all are here today, you're engaged in your home states because the American people are standing up and saying we want our freedom back. And I'm going to give the simplest and best advice for President Obama and for Republicans and Democrats in Congress. Listen to the people. You know, earlier this year, one of the first battles we had in the U.S. Senate, I was proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with my friend Rand Paul in a 13-hour filibuster. When Rand stood up to filibuster drones, the Washington Graybeard said, "What are you doing?" And what happened is the American people got engaged. Millions of Americans became fixated by C-SPAN. A phrase that doesn't occur naturally in the English language. Americans began tweeting, began speaking out, and you saw as a result of your engagement, President Obama forced to do what he had refused to do for 3 consecutive weeks, which is admit in writing the Constitution limits his ability to target U.S. citizens. The president was forced to listen to the people. We saw another battle on guns. Now on this, Vice President Joe Biden you know, the nice thing is, you don't even need a punchline. You just say his name, people laugh. But Vice President Joe Biden had some advice. He said, if your house is attacked, just go outside with a double-barreled shotgun and fire both barrels in the air. Which is very, very good advice if it so happens your house is being attacked by a flock of geese. But again, Washington politicians, there was a consensus that the federal government needed to pass new laws restricting our Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. And the American people rose up overwhelmingly and said, protect our Bill of Rights. And as a result of your leadership, your passion, when those votes came to a vote on the floor of the Senate, every single proposal that would have undermined the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms was voted down on the floor of the Senate. The president was forced to listen to the people. Now, we've got a lot of current challenges. None more serious than the prospect that this president may lead our nation into war. You know, this week we saw Parliament come back and debate going to war, and Parliament said, no, we don't want to go to war in Syria. We saw the Knesset in Israel come back into session to debate what to do about Syria. And, you know, I'm very pleased to tell you Just a few minutes ago, President Obama, in a nationally televised address, told the American people he is going to wait to bring Congress back into session and listen to Congress. That's the way it's supposed to work. The Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war. And I am very, very glad that the President listened to bipartisan calls to come before Congress and come before the American people and make the case, not based on international norms, not based on international law, but based on the only proper criterion for potential military action, which is the vital national security interest of the United States of America. On Syria, the President and Republicans and Democrats in Congress need to listen to the people. You look at other fights going on. Right now, the House of Representatives has before it an immigration bill. On immigration, the President and Republicans and Democrats in Washington need to listen to the people. Right now, the federal government is trying to impose Common Core education standards on the states. On Common Core, the President and Republicans and Democrats in Congress need to listen to the people. And you know, if you talk about priorities, every single poll that is done of the American people over and over again shows the number one priority of the American people is restoring jobs in the economy. You know, it doesn't matter whether you're asking Republicans or Democrats or independents. It ain't a complicated question for most Americans. Let's get economic growth back. And I'll tell you the single most frustrating aspect of serving in the U.S. Senate these last 8 months is in that time we have spent virtually zero time even discussing jobs in the economy. You know, politicians scratch their head and say, why is it that Congress has 10, 12, 14% approval ratings? Well, when you have career politicians in both parties ignoring the will of the people over and over and over again, don't be surprised when we, the people, aren't happy about it. My number one priority in office is restoring economic growth. Economic growth is foundational to every other challenge we've got, whether it's unemployment, whether it's the national debt, whether it's maintaining our military strength. With growth, we do all of that. Without it, we can't do any of that. And I'll tell you the two most effective levers the federal government has to restore economic growth are fundamental tax reform and regulatory reform. Now, we have seen in recent months reports of the IRS demanding of citizens, tell us what books you're reading. Prepare a book report on the books you're reading, telling other citizens, tell us the content of your prayers. Let me be very, very clear. The federal government has no business asking any American the content of our prayers. Now, on one level, that scandal is indicative of the corruption and abuse of power in this administration. But on another level, it is the result of far too much power being aggregated in Washington, regardless of which party is in power. And that's why I think the simplest and best solution is we should abolish the IRS. Now, I'll tell you, going back to the disconnect we talked about, when you say that in Washington, D.C., they scream and yell as well, but from a slightly different perspective. Listen, in Washington, talking about abolishing the IRS is considered crazy talk. Why? Because there are an army of lobbyists on K Street that make hundreds of millions of dollars carving out exception after loophole in the IRS code. How do we get it done? We need a simple, fair, flat tax so that every American can fill out his or her taxes on a postcard. That will only happen if millions upon millions of Americans rise up and demand it of our elected officials in Washington. That is the only way it will happen. And the second most critical piece to restoring economic growth is regulatory reform. You know, and the single most important regulatory reform we could do is we need to repeal every single word of Obamacare. And let me tell you, right now, we have a moment in time. In the next 30 days, we have our single best opportunity we have ever had to stand up and defund Obamacare. Now, I want to spend a few minutes talking about the battle to defund Obamacare, because I think it is the most important fight facing our country right now. Listen, Obamacare is the #1 job killer in the United States of America. If you want economic growth back, nothing is holding it back more than Obamacare. You know, just a couple of weeks ago, I sat down in a small business roundtable in Kerrville, Texas, small town in central Texas. Had about 20 small business owners and asked each of them, share with me an issue that's on your heart, whatever it was, totally open-ended question. As we went around the room, over half of those small business owners described how Obamacare was the single biggest challenge they faced in their business. 4 or 5 of them talked about how they had 30, 40 employees. They had opportunities to expand their business. But they weren't going to expand because if they crossed the threshold of 50 employees, they'd fall under Obamacare and that cost would drive them out of business. You know, one woman described how she owns several fast food restaurants. And almost choking up with tears, she described how she's been forced to forcibly reduce the hours of her employees to 29 hours a week. And she said, listen, these people have been with us 10, 20 years. These are single moms. These are people who are struggling, and they can't afford to feed their families on 29 hours a week. But you know what? They can't feed their families if I go out of business either. Another fellow who's in the business of manufacturing hunting blinds described how he was forced to move his manufacturing overseas to China. And he said, listen, I want to manufacture here in the United States. That was 150 to 200 good manufacturing jobs. But if they're here, I come under Obamacare, and we can't be competitive in the marketplace with the cost that that's imposing. Now look, you may not believe small business owners. You may not believe the politicians who talk about it. But how about Max Baucus, the Democrat who wrote Obamacare? He describes it as a major train wreck. That's the guy who wrote it. Now, maybe he didn't read it. James Hoffa, the president of the Teamsters, has said Obamacare is destroying the 40-hour work week. That is the backbone of the American middle class. Now, that's not me saying that. That's the Teamsters. The IRS Employees Union has publicly asked to be exempted from Obamacare. These are the guys in charge of enforcing it on the rest of us. And of course, President Obama most shamefully has lawlessly exempted members of Congress from Obamacare. And that was at the behest of Harry Reid and the Senate Democrats who passed it. And you want to see the difference, that disconnect between career politicians and the American people, you don't have to look any further than right there. So what do? A lot of good suggestions there. But let me focus on one direct fight. On September 30th, the continuing resolution that funds the federal government expires. I, along with a number of other senators, have publicly pledged under no circumstance will we vote for any continuing resolution that funds even 1 penny of Obamacare. Now, the reaction here, just like with abolishing the IRS, is exactly the same as the reaction in Washington, except they're yelling different things. And listen, I'm going to be brutally honest. If the ordinary rules of Washington apply, if the forums in which the case has to be made are the smoke-filled rooms of Washington, we can't win this fight. I can't win this fight. Mike Lee can't win this fight. No elected politician in Washington can win this fight. The only people who can win this fight are you. We are trying to fundamentally change the rules of Washington. We are trying to fundamentally remind people that under our Constitution, sovereignty doesn't reside in Washington, D.C. It resides with we the people. Now, right now, the people who are fighting the hardest against our effort to defund Obamacare, sadly, are Republicans. Over and over again, they say, we can't win this fight. Well, you know what? You lose 100% of the fights that you surrender at the outset. The path to winning this fight is simple. The House of Representatives, in my opinion, should pass a continuing resolution, funds the entirety of the federal government, every bit of it, except Obamacare. And it should explicitly prohibit spending any money, discretionary or mandatory, on Obamacare. Now we've seen the next page of this play. President Obama, the Senate Democrats will get up and scream and yell, the mean, nasty Republicans are threatening to shut down the government. And at that point, We got to do something we haven't done in a long, long time. Stand up and win the argument. We got to say, look, we have voted to fund the federal government. We don't want to shut the federal government down. President Obama has already granted waivers to every giant corporation in America to spare them the cost of Obamacare. Why is President Obama threatening to shut the government down to deny those same waivers to hardworking American families? President Obama grants waivers to members of Congress. Why is President Obama threatening to shut the federal government down to deny those waivers to hardworking American families? And if President Obama forces a partial temporary shutdown, you have an impasse. One side or the other has to blink. How do you win this fight? Don't blink! The grassroots awakening that we are seeing is powerful. You know, just a few weeks ago, a national website was launched. And Obamacare began to be lost. Just a few weeks ago, the national website don'tfundit.com was launched. Do you know, as of just a few minutes ago, there were 970,000 signatures on don'tfundit.com. How do we get men and women in Washington to listen to the American people? We get millions upon millions of Americans rising up, holding them accountable. Between now and September 30th, if we see millions of Americans going to don'tfundit.com, signing the petition, picking up the phone, calling Republicans, calling Democrats, calling their elected officials, and saying, stand up and do the right thing. If the American people demand, stop Obamacare, the greatest job killer in this country, eventually our elected officials will be forced to do what they should have been doing all along, which is listen to the people. By Labor Day, don'tfundit.com is going to break 1 million. And if every one of those million gets one other person, we'll make it 2 million. And if every one of those gets one other person, we'll make it 4 million. And there comes a point where they have no choice but listen to the people. I want to close by saying... That's a wonderful reaction. And I have to admit, it's much, much better than the alternative where you say, in conclusion, and the audience bursts into applause. But I want to close by saying two things. Number one, thank you. Thank you for your passion. Thank you. Thank you. I will confess, that's the same thing my wife says when I come home from the gym early. But I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your passion, for being here, for being away from your family or bringing your family here, for your energy to turn this country around. Your passion is what's going to do it, because every one of us remembers what Ronald Reagan said, that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. That we don't pass it on to our kids in the bloodstream. And not a one of us in this room wants to see the day when we're talking to our children or our children's children and answering the question, what was it like to live in America when people were free? That's why we're here, because the men and women in this room are not willing to answer that question. We are standing together to defend liberty, to defend the Constitution, and to restore that shining city on a hill that is the United States of America. Thank you, and God bless you.